Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on this event. This is a one UN event on the theme of Sustainable Development Goal number 8, which is on decent work and economic growth. We have a sub-theme which is a just transition to a low-carbon, inclusive green economy. We are going to start just in a minute. I wanted to inform you that the UNFCCC Secretariat is going to broadcast this event live on YouTube, but there's not going to be any images of yourselves. It will be just the discussions that will be accessible around the world for those who are connected through YouTube. We have the pleasure and honor of having a very distinguished panel for this event. We have 7 speakers that will address the questions, and we propose to have this discussion in 2 rounds of our panel. So it is my pleasure to invite first, for the first round, His Excellency Mr. Andrei Kovhuto, Minister of Environment of Belarus. We'll have in this first panel as well His Excellency Paweł Salek, Secretary of State, Minister of Environment of Poland. We'll have Ms. Sharon Burrow, who is Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation. And we will have Mr. Peter Flasch-Bars, who is State Secretary, Germany Minister of Environment. So the State Secretary is on his way, I understand, and will join us soon. So with that, Excellency, may I invite you to please join us? I think I just wanted to say just one word before we give the floor to His Excellency. This event is going to discuss decent work and economic growth, but in the context of a just transition to a low carbon, inclusive green economy. We all know that what is being discussed in this forum is going to have tremendous implications for the world of work, for enterprises, for workers, for communities around the world. And this understanding has been very much captured in the Paris Agreement on climate change, where there is a specific reference that parties have made to the imperative of a just transition of the world of work and the creation of decent work for all. In this context, parties have also recognized that governments have an important role to play, but so do social partners. And that is why we have proposed to you to have this panel, which is including representatives from governments, parties, but also representatives from employees' organizations and workers' organizations. So with these words, it's my pleasure now to invite His Excellency to first deliver his statement. Excellency, you feel where you feel comfortable? Yes, it is up to
you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, cooperation in the field of green investment and technologies, low carbon development, renewable energy sources becomes one of the priorities of the Republic of Belarus. In Belarus, as in many other countries which are dedicated to implementation of CDS's resources spent for environmental protection stop being expenses but become investment. It is a reality of today. Today, competitiveness of national economies depends in ecological certification of products and production processes and prosperity on success of low carbon development. Obvious are benefits of economies based on green principles, eco-marking, green producement, eco-innovation, development of SMEs. Yeah. The integration platform more and more often hold discussions on harmonization of ecological standards and development of closed-cycle economy. For example, among measures for green economy suggested as a 8-minister conference Environment for Europe in Batumi, Georgia, there is adaptation of environmental management and production standards, EMAS. The strategic frameworks on greening of economy adopted as the conference foresees implementation of such a development model that would ensure economic progress, social justice, and sustainable use of natural resources without threat for the future generations. The Batumi initiative of green economy, in which Belarus actively participates, is a very important step forward and provides concrete examples of countries' green initiatives. International financial cooperation provides any credits only on condition that the financed project will have an input of CO2 reductions. Belarus considers green economy as well as implementation of the Paris Agreement and strategic vector. We already are introducing sustainable production and consumption models, sustainable and high productive agriculture, new technologies in electro-energy sector, smart city concept. Integrated environmental permits as element of state regulation of advice impact on environment and stimulating introduction of best available technical methods. We have established a BET center and are constantly preparing technical acts and BAT guidelines. We have a green schools network comprising of about 100 schools and develop green tourism. The industrial enterprise of Belarus since 2003 introduced ISO 14001 standard. Today, more than 270 enterprises are certified. We are now studied the European Union experience of introducing and verifying the mass system for the further introduction at the industrial enterprises in our country. Clean Production Center set up in Belarus has started working with SMEs to introduce the above mentioned approaches. In this context, Belarus is interested in such standards as Norwegian Eco Lighthouse and Austrian Eco Profit. Belarus has introduced extended producer responsibility principle. It is obvious that many branches of economy still have real demand of modernized technological process and introduce green technologies. Among such branches are agriculture, forestry, energy and transport, industry, construction, waste management. By the way, activities of many of them found reflection in the Batumi action for green economy. Development of green economy also means that market of ecosystem service in developed for Belarus. There are four directions in which it is real to use compensational payment and create markets. Service that provide fresh drinking water. Service then ensure carbon absorption, forest preservation. Services that preserve biodiversity service that preserve landscapes. What is also important to notice that all our efforts mean creating working places for people. Sometimes it even means second best to rural territories. Just some examples from Belarus. Introduction of modern European separate waste collection and processing system in a small town in Belarus helped to increase extraction of secondary raw materials by 3 times, created working places for local people. Later, there was a governmental resolution for all other territories to pick up the experience. When one of our projects started to be implemented in Brest region near village Vysokaya, there were 2 houses left in the village. The project offered infrastructural changes and new working places. Now all the property sold out in Vysokaya. This place has become attractive to local people and tourists. So, in new agenda for Belarus is the development of national plan of action to introduce green economy principles in the branches of national economy. This plan will become a platform of unit efforts in developing low carbon economy in implementation the NDC of Belarus in accordance with the Paris Agreement. Another step forward in implementing of the international agenda is development and implementation of a long-term strategy of development with low-level greenhouse gas emission. Its main purpose is to achieve balance between anthropogenic emission from sources and GHG absorption. In conclusion, I would like to underline this important role of international organizations and donor countries which provide efficient international assistance in the transition of national economies to green economies and getting access to innovative technologies. I would like to additionally stress the necessity of innovative technologies transfer in the fields of emission reduction and GHG absorption increase. Owing to the international partners, we improve not only the institutional component, but on the example of pilot projects in the regions of the country, we make step to totally change the working methods, the way of life, and the way of thinking. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Now it's my honor and pleasure to turn to His Excellency, Mr. Patel Satek, Secretary of State of the Environment of Poland. Sir, we know Poland has gone through a transition from a state-controlled economy to a market economy. We would very much like to hear your experience in this process and in terms of efforts that have been made to green the economy along the way. So, sir, as you wish to, up to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it's true, and Poland have a good experience to sustainable transition, sustainable development. But I think so. We have time after the statement speaking about. But I think it's general. So my country is a good example. If we discuss about economic transition. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall start with expressing my thanks to our host for giving us an opportunity to exchange views and share experience on just transition. I believe this session of the Conference of the Parties is a perfect opportunity to understand that there are many paths leading to achievement of Paris Agreement. As many paths as there are parties during COP21, Poland was advocated the principle of climate neutrality because from our history we know that measurements aimed at climate change mitigation and adaptation and diversity and must be flexible to be effective, adapted to national circumstances. Almost 3 decades ago, Poland started its profound economic, social, and environmental transition, following the path of the economic growth accompanied by greenhouse gases emission decoupling. Although the GDP doubled in the last 25 years, Poland was also able to achieve its Kyoto Protocol commitment, reducing CO2 emissions by 30% and comparison to its base year. Deep changes in all economic sectors led to dynamic growth, but also to deep social imbalance. Taking into account the principles of sustainable development, we instead heavily on 2 pillars that helped a successful transition. One of them is education that helped in quickly make up for qualification among all social groups. Poland is a country with a skilled workforce that helped us to quickly increase the share of services in gross domestic product. But we did not abandon our industry, and the decrease in heavy industry was balanced by growth other industry sectors, for instance, wood products. Did you know that Poland is among top 5 world furniture exporting countries? That's one of our inputs into carbon sequestration. The other pillars in environmental protection based on the special scheme of environmental funds, providing financing resources for infrastructure investments in all sectors of environmental protection. These measures helps us in keeping our clean environment and rich biodiversity. In the times of competition for land due to economic growth, we managed to increase the share of our forest cover by almost 2% our territory. We do not to stop here because I believe that we can more in the spirit of the Paris Agreement. We want to improve our energy production by investing in clean technologies, but also geothermal energy, biogas production, and new technologies allow for energy efficiency, particularly in building and mobility sector. We intend to combine increased sea and inland water transport with the revolution of electromobility. We believe that these measures allow us to maintain our competitiveness and energy security. On the other side, there is a large potential of increasing carbon sequestration with the concept of forest carbon farms. I believe that forest and land management is an important tool for climate mitigation and adaptation, helping us to overcome the issue of hunger, desertification, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation. And that brings me to my last point, ladies and gentlemen. In our race for economic growth measurements in gross domestic product, we cannot forget about sustainable development has its three pillars: economic, social, and environmental ones. Only by keeping balance between these three pillars, we can move fast to a good future for the next generation. In cooperation with UNCE, Poland actively engages in green economy projects and air quality protection. This was discussed during 8th Ministerial Conference in Batumi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm very confident that there will be a lot of interest in the experience of Poland, and we will come back to that after we hear from all of our panelists. It is now my pleasure and honor to invite Mr. Jochen Flashpart. Sir, I'm saying it right. Um, State Secretary, Germany Minister of Environment. Sir, Germany has been looked at a lot in terms of what you have done, in terms of ecological fiscal reform. And there are questions now on how fiscal changes could be useful in driving this transition, also in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we very much like to hear your views on that.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me here to this very important side event. It's about the SDG8, and that is decent work and economic growth. And I think that's very relevant for us coming from the environmental side as the Ministry of Environment to look also on that side of our new 2030 agenda. Now, it's not only about the sectoral approaches for climate, for biodiversity, whatever environmental issue you name, but it's also, and maybe more importantly, about transforming our whole economy from brown to green. And having said that, we have to organize it in a way exactly in line with SDG8 to create new jobs for those who don't have jobs yet, and also new jobs for those who are in different places now. So we have to look at the transformational side, especially with regard to job transformation being so important also to get acceptance in our societies for this kind of transformation we are heading for. It's very obvious that we have a huge potential to organize all this in a way that the net balance will be positive. There are tons of studies about that. This means for individual incomes, this means for employment and as overall growth of our economies. The challenge is that we do it in a way that we also look at the individual jobs, that we look at the regions, how to manage it in a way that not only the net balance is positive, but also that we follow the line we promised in New York. We will leave nobody behind. And that means also to look at those who are sitting in the wrong places at the moment and whom we have to move with their jobs or provide other jobs in the future. Where is Germany at the moment? Looking at climate change, which obviously is here in Marrakesh in the focus of the debate. We are compared to 1990 at a reduction of 28% greenhouse gas reduction. We want to achieve 40% in 2020. We are struggling with that, I have to admit, and then we want to achieve 45% greenhouse cut by 2030 and being completely or more or less greenhouse gas neutral, which in our view also includes decarbonization by 2050. So we want to be one of the first industrialized nations to be greenhouse gas neutral already in the mid of the century. As you know, Germany is a highly industrialized country. We are coming from fossil and nuclear, from a fossil and nuclear-based economy. We decided to phase out nuclear by 2022, the latest, and we are promoting very intensively, maybe I can say aggressively, the increase of renewable energy. We now have 31% renewable electricity in our grid. In the past, sometimes there was a criticism that you can't run an economy like Germany with the radiation of Alaska. I think we are on our way to prove, yes, we can. And it's also economically beneficial. We have done a lot on energy efficiency. We decoupled our growth from the energy consumption and have a decrease of 70%, 7% wishful thinking, 7% since 2008. Now looking at the economic side, we created since the beginning of our Energiewende, the energy transition in Germany, we created 800,000 additional jobs, and we created a saving of 30 billion euros per year due to lower energy consumption and lower fossil energy imports. So this is all positive. Now looking at the challenging side, we could have been much more advanced with our greenhouse gas reduction. Looking at the increase of renewable, we made significant progress on that, but with the reduction of fossils, we are lacking far behind. And that is basically because we didn't start early enough. We have overcapacities, huge overcapacities in fossil energy. Our coal power plant park provides these overcapacities. We are disturbing markets, not only our own market. If I look to Pavel, also sometimes Poland is not very happy with our overproduction. Also France, sometimes they like it when they have to shut down their nuclears in winter. But in general, this is our challenge. And it's not a technical challenge. It's also not an economic challenge, because it would be cheaper to get rid of that. It's a social and it's a regional economy problem. Because we have regions in our country which are completely dependent, as parts of Poland are, on the fossil energy base, and this is the challenge we have to meet. Coming to the point you mentioned, Chair, what we did in the last years were very important and very strict economic interventions into the market. It was not a market based development at all, because we used instruments like our feed-in tariff. We used a lot of governmental money for the transformational processes, and we are not yet in the position that this is poorly market driven. But we all know that we have to end up there. We started with a fiscal reform in 2002 with our eco tax reform. We made tremendously positive experiences with that, but we also saw that it is politically very difficult to go along these tax reforms, because you always have losers. It's always easy to attack a tax reform, because you not only provide advantages for some, but also disadvantages from some who benefited from subsidies, for example, or from lower taxation. We believe that we have to adjust that. We believe that our emission trading scheme we have in Europe is not sufficient for that, at least not at the moment. And therefore, we believe that we need new approaches to create, at the end, a global carbon market with the right pricing for carbon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, sir. Before we proceed, I understand His Excellency has other engagement and will have to leave us, but we'll have an opportunity to exchange still further. Sir, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you. Thank you so much, I think we have heard a very interesting story, and sir, I liked what you said about not only looking at individuals, but what is happening in regions. And just this morning, the European Trade Union Confederation had an event in the European Pavilion presenting a result of a 2-year project looking at just transition in different regional contexts within Europe. But I think now I have the honor of turning to Ms. Sharon Barrow, Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation. Sharon would certainly give you this message much better than I could do. Sharon, you know, unions have been at the forefront of this agenda. Please let us know what you're doing globally and perhaps any reaction to what we have heard so far.
Well, thank you. And I think I can do it from here. But 2015, as you know, saw 2 historic decisions by global leaders. Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. Together, they chart a course for a zero poverty, zero carbon world. But now we have to see the reforms to national and global systems that will deliver on this promise of social and climate justice. And the challenge is serious. The global workforce is actually in trouble. 60% only of around $3 trillion are in the formal economy. And there, more than 50% of workers are in vulnerable, short-term, or indeed insecure or unsafe work. 40% of our brothers and sisters are in the informal economy, the sector of desperation, no rights, no minimum wages, no collective bargaining, certainly, and no rule of law. Often no social protection, or indeed almost inevitably no social protection. And then there's up to 45 million of the world's people in modern slavery, forced labour. And indeed, both modern slavery and informal work are now appearing in our supply chains, the dominant model of trade. So if you have watched and witnessed the frustration and the political anger of people, this is why. So this makes this combination of Agenda 2030 and the Paris Climate Agreement critical. And I know, because we talk to workers, that we have to give them hope. They feel marginalised, they don't feel listened to, and they feel powerless to change a situation where they're frightened for their families. So we need to deliver on employment. We need to deliver on decent work. That's goal 8 of Agenda 2030. We need to eliminate modern slavery or forced labour, to formalise work and to ensure safe and secure work, and to share our prosperity. The world is 3 times richer in the last 30 years, and yet the labour income share for working people has gone backwards. So with a social protection floor for everybody, a minimum living wage on which workers can live with dignity, strengthened collective bargaining systems, and we can take a leaf out of Germany's book there, I think one of the strongest bargaining systems still in the world, and indeed to share prosperity and the rule of law nationally and internationally, we can actually turn around a system that's actually failing people. I might add gender equality. Goal 5 is also critical for us because, look at this panel, with due respect, it's a little better than the one before. And but nevertheless, one amongst 5 very serious leaders is not enough for us. And we have a message to our brothers. We say count women in, to the labour market, to our unions, to our governments, to leadership everywhere. For climate action, I must say, which is the partner and part of Agenda 2030, but elaborated in the Paris Agreement, then the recognition from leaders here in the last 2 weeks of the urgency and the need for short and long-term goals is welcomed by us. But now we must turn those NDCs into development plans, plans that are transparent, realise jobs, allow us to raise finance, and have just transition measures at the centre of them. Industrial transformation, unions know, will touch every sector. It's not just the energy sector, although that's the most urgent, but every sector. And to meet the challenge of that transformation, we need to be confident that if we are investing in that transformation, it will mean jobs, but it must mean planning. We need to ensure inclusion and the hope that accompanies just transition measures. We cannot afford more social division. Workers have simple ambitions. They want to know what their government plans are for industrial transformation, and they want to be involved in the consultations through their unions. They want to know what their industry or employers in industries plan to meet the test of the Paris Agreement. They want to know how their industries will be diversified, and with a shift in both the energy mix and production processes, they want to be at the table with their knowledge of their occupations and professions to help design the future. Resource productivity will underpin new generation prosperity, and we want to be part of that. But where jobs are displaced, we do want guarantees, guaranteed pensions for older workers. For younger workers, we want skills and redeployment, and security for families is essential with income support and other social protection measures. And there must be plans for community renewal. We cannot see stranded communities or stranded workers. So where we are shifting the industry base, the energy mix in vulnerable communities, we must see investment in infrastructure, in new industries, in new forms of energy to make that possible. So that means economic diversity, activities for communities to have hope in, and of course, jobs. We have established a Just Transition Centre. We've started at work around this question already. We're engaged with dialogue with governments, businesses, cities and communities. And it's based on dialogue which will lead to plans and investment. This is the key. Renewable energy and a cleaner industrial process are the foundations of a sustainable future. And the decision here in Marrakesh to establish a technical working group on economic diversification, transformation and just transition measures is a very welcome step, and we thank the governments here for their support. The ILO, we believe, with its unique tripartite structure, with actually already negotiated just transition guidelines with the core labour standards and its technical expertise on labour markets, can help and be at the centre of that. I would simply say to you that just transition and sustainable development means investment and jobs. And Agenda 2030 requires those jobs to be good jobs where workers enjoy rights, living wages, and a share of the prosperity they generate. It's simple for us. There are no jobs on a dead planet, so we are determined to do our bit to ensure a sustainable and just future. It is possible, but it will take all of us, and it will take respect for workers and their families. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I think this was very inspiring after what we have heard from representatives of government. I think all of us in this room are very committed to a transition to a low carbon economy. But just to echo what you have said, Sharon, I don't think that any of us wants to be part of stranded workers or stranded communities. So with that, I would just like to invite everybody to react to what we have heard so far. Any comments, any questions that you may have for our panelists, please feel free to raise your hands. And since we had this remark from Sharon that our panel is very close to a manel, so let us see if any of our sisters who are in the room would like to speak first.
Mr. Chairman, honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen, brother and sister. I'm Gregory Trefon. I represent at COP Trade Union Cadre. We represent engineer, manager, supervisor in Poland. I have only few comments. I think in Poland, the social dialogue reborn, and this is very positive for us, for unions. We have a lot of meetings with Poland governments, regional governments, and also local authorities in the context of climate change policy. We have also huge support from Poland president. This is a real leader of Poland's social dialogue. I think that we realize that we can't do climate policy without intervention in industrial policy. Climate policy is not a story of good intention. Energy transition requires long preparation, innovation, and especially investment. Just transition means that workers will be ready for changes. As workers, we expected good social policy and just transition and focus the plan for safeguards, decent job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I see, yes, let us have just two more. I wanted to invite any of our sisters in the room, but please, sir here. Yeah, let's work. I just would like to invite sir in there, and then sir will come back.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Phili Mapulan. I'm from South Africa. I'm the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee in Parliament on Environment. I just want to remark on the presentation made by Germany. I think Germany has made quite a remarkable progress in investment around renewable energy. And it's quite heartening to hear that Germany in 2022 will be moving completely away from nuclear. So I think this is contrary to the narrative that an industrialized country cannot afford to move away from coal in particular and nuclear and move away towards renewable. So Germany, I think it's quite a good example in countries, especially in the developed countries, investing much more significantly in the renewables. I just want to ask one question on whether all the energy requirements in Germany are being provided by Germany, or is Germany exporting or importing importing power from any of its neighbors, in particular France? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, let us go for the just a final question for this round, please.
Yeah, this is a very interested question. Sharon, do you consider going on tour to spread the gospel to your fellow trade unionists? Because really, I think you do a splendid job, but unfortunately, I wish many more trade unionists, especially in Europe and especially in France, would have the same insight and the same understanding of what it's all about. Pension funds are managing trillions of euros, and many are managed with trade unionists sitting at the board. And the sad truth is that not so many really have that kind of knowledge and expertise. And frankly, you would do a great job helping us just by coming, visit us, and meeting with them, and just explaining, as you splendidly said, that investing in the transition means creating jobs, good jobs, well paid, and contributing to a sustainable growth. So I wish we can talk about that later on.
Thank you very much, sir. I would just like to turn to our panel. I think we had three questions more or less directed at each of you, Excellencies and Sharon. So may I invite you to give any feedback to those comments and suggestions as you wish?
Sorry. Let me start with the question that was directed to me. You're right, we have $30 trillion, more than $30 trillion now invested in the global economy, our pension funds, we call it workers' capital. But we have a whole range of sovereign funds as well, where citizens and unions have an interest. And we have 4 fundamental principles. We are telling those funds that if they don't commit to disclose where pension money is invested, we want to know why, and we'll be asking them, you know, why it is that we don't know what they're doing with our money. We want to know that transparent corporate procedures for due diligence and human rights, the UN Business and Human Rights principles, are in place and it's dealt with, so we clean up the deficiencies of the global supply chains and generally a lack of dignity and respect for workers. We want to know that corporate plans for the consequences of climate change, consistent with the Paris Agreement, are in fact there, developed, transparent, and able to be monitored with our engagement. And we need corporate responsibility for their own risk in terms of investment and environmental redevelopment. So we're serious about this as well. I didn't include it because of time, but I can assure you, if you add our mutuals, we actually even have more capital. On the question of will we come on tour, that's why we built the Just Transition Centre. But what I can give you, we're very conscious. We have to drive this down now, which is why we're committed to the ILO's mandate of social dialogue. We work with business. Sometimes we, of course, are on the different side of the table, but inevitably we have to bargain for a future. We have to work with governments and employers in a tripartite structure for the future. And we have to, of course, begin with those industries that are most vulnerable. So just invite me, we'll come. We can set up roundtables through the Just Transition Centre, because you're right, education is everything. I just wanted to say something, and really I don't want to jump in front of the German government, but from my own personal perspective, I'm sorry for my South African brother. But if we condemn our developing economies to the same energy mix in terms of coal and ultimately other fossil fuels that they have today, we won't use the opportunity for leapfrogging for a different model of development. I do not want to see my brothers and sisters in developing economies constrained by the next generation of prosperity for a sustainable future that they are now. And I'm sad to say that there's a lot of encouragement for new coal-fired power stations and so on, and they're good jobs. We own all of these actors. We have the climate warriors, we're organising the new energy workers, and we have the fossil fuel workers, and they've brought us the prosperity of today, and we demand respect for them. But we will work in energy. Many of our children will, but I have to say, if we're going to meet the challenge, it won't be in fossil fuels. So let's see what we can do to make sure every country has a fair access to technology, to finance, to actually make that transition to the next generation of a more just economy.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We have chance to change the point and discuss about climate policy, climate protection, and with a trade union. But it's a very good situation, because we have a good provocation discussed, because our economy in my country is completely different than German country and German economy, because of course we have a good relation because we are the neighbors, and I would like to mention, so in Polish path to economic transition is small different, because in the basic, in the sources in the Poland is of course coal. It is not secret, yes, but coal in case in Poland is energy security sources, and we have a situation, so we need a long time to changing our economy to the green economy, because we have individual circumstances. But in my opinion, and if you look on the Polish history in the last 25 years, we have situations so good actors in the Polish economy was and is a national fund, a special fund, which support invests to the environmental protection. And this fund, and survivorship fund, because we have 16 funds, is a special institution to which is support Polish economy. But money in this fund is with a firm who using environment. Yes, for example, firm emission pollutions and pay to the government money to using the environment. And it is my opinion. But we need when I say we need energy security, need security supply. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to address two of the questions and answer or bring my view on two of the questions mentioned. One is about the transformational process. And again, what I said earlier, the most important thing to do is start early. Start early with transformation. Otherwise, we will have huge problems to organize the transformational process without attacking social justice. So whenever we want to avoid structural disruptions, we have to start early. That means for governments that we have to set the right frame, regulatory, but we also have to provide the right vision. Where do we want to be? And we did that in Paris with our Paris Agreement and the clear statement of a greenhouse gas neutral world in the course of this century. This is something very clear. And now I come to the other actors. Governments are not the only ones who decide on our future and about, especially not about our economic future. It's basically enterprises who make their decisions as well. And of course, as I said, governments have to set the regulation and the restrictions and maybe give incentives for a while. But enterprises and decision makers there, they have to anticipate the future. And that is the problem we saw in our country and many other countries, that many entrepreneurs tried to stop regulation, to make regulation weaker, to make it more comfortable for them. And that is right so for the moment, but it's not a wise way to lead an enterprise with a future perspective. They have to anticipate what the expectations of societies, what the needs of societies are in future. For example, in the car industry, we see it all over the world, also in my country, that of course car industry tries to avoid regulation with regard to emissions and so on and so forth. But what I expect from a modern and wisely led enterprise in this sector is to think, what is the mobility concept of the future that fits to our, not only to our 2030 agenda, but also to the requirements of Paris. And then they will go into concept and channel R&D in the right direction. And thirdly, we all together have, if everything set rightly in place, we have to work on the rest that we can't avoid in structural changes. And then we need governmental money to organize a social justice transformational process. The answer to the question of our energy mix, yes, as I said, we go out of nuclear, we go out of coal, and we increase renewables. And at the moment, or no, one step back. A couple of years ago, we had a huge debate in Germany whether we produce an electricity gap by doing this at the same time, reducing nuclear and doing the first steps and reducing coal. What we have at the moment is a huge oversupply, as I said. So we, of course, every now and then we also export from our neighbors as we are in a common energy market. But the net situation is that we hugely export electricity in a non-sustainable way. So again, this is something we have to adjust. And at the very end, we have to ensure in these very important tracks we go for our national economies, that this is not only something for academia. We have to be aware that this affects the real life of people, of workers, of their families, and we have to do it in a way that all of them will have a positive perspective. Thank you.
Well, I just would like to end thanking you. We have heard the need for government strategies and the role of international cooperation, technology transfer from Belarus. We have heard from Poland the need for a transition that has economic and social policies going hand in hand. We've heard from Germany the need to take action early, but that this is not just a business for governments, it is also for enterprises and workers. So with that, I'll just thank our panel for this first round. And then I would like to turn to the second part of this discussion, inviting Mr. Pierre Vincenzini from the International Organization of Employers. We'll hear from the Philippines. I'd like to invite Madame Evelyn Cruzada, Assistant Cabinet Secretary, Office of the Cabinet Secretary, Climate Change Commission, I understand as well. And Mr. Martin Frick, Director of Climate Change and Environment Division at the FAO. Welcome. I just would like to start with the Philippines. Madame, the Philippines is particularly vulnerable to climate change, as we all know. I remember in 2014 when you were in Lima negotiating climate change. There was a typhoon Hagupit that hit the country. So what is your perspective, and what are the policies and strategies that you are looking at in terms of a just transition?
Good afternoon. Let me start by talking about the Philippines in general. The Philippines has an estimated 100.98 million people as of 2015. Poverty incidence for 2015 was at 21.6%, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority. As to its employment rate, as of July 2016, it is estimated at 94.6, with the services sector comprising 55.3% of the population who are employed. Agriculture is the second largest group, making up 26.9%, while the industry sector comprised the remaining 17.8%. While the Philippines remains to be one of the fastest growing economies in Southeast Asia, unemployment is at 5.4%, and majority of those who are unemployed are males as of July 2016. Of particular concern are the unemployed youth at 1.3 million, or almost one half of the total unemployed. Also, a major concern are those vulnerably employed at 38.9%, around 15 million people, or 4 out of 10 Filipino workers. These are workers who lack decent working conditions and often characterized by inadequate earnings, low productivity, and difficult working conditions that undermine workers' fundamental rights. Poor quality jobs have hindered the country's efforts to eliminate poverty and ensure growth is inclusive. The poverty rate among Filipino workers was at 21.9% in 2012 and is illustrative of unproductive jobs and earnings too low to escape poverty. The Philippines climate scenario and its effects. We all know that climate change and environmental degradation pose major risks to economic prosperity and social progress. The Philippines is among the most vulnerable to climate and disaster risks. At the same time, the country, which is highly dependent on natural resource base for sustenance and livelihood, suffers major human-induced environmental degradation. The Philippines experiences approximately 20 typhoons annually, with record-breaking ones being registered in recent years. German Watch ranked the Philippines as the fourth country most at risk to climate change for the period 1995 to 2014, and in 2013 was in fact ranked number 1. Just last October of this year, Typhoon Haima ravaged the northern portion of the Philippines and was categorized as a super typhoon, and it caused damage approximately 3.7 billion pesos or 75 million US dollars, according to the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. Volatility in employment can be traced in large part to impacts of climate change and the increasing frequency and intensities of extreme weather events disrupting economic activity in all sectors, and in particular in the agriculture sector. When Typhoon Haiyan struck the Philippines in 2013, an estimated 5.9 million workers were affected. For 2015, the farm sector of the Philippines grew only by 0.11% in terms of production volume compared to the 1.39 growth the year prior due to El Nino. Heat stress also negatively affects workers. Meanwhile, we can expect an average of at least 2.2% to 6.7% loss of GDP due to climate change by the year 2100. Clearly, the effects of climate change are grave. We recognize that these vulnerabilities, combined with current carbon and resource-intensive approaches to economic growth and development, will increasingly undermine productivity and affect enterprises, jobs, and livelihoods. Some of the existing vulnerabilities are likely to be exacerbated with a high risk of widening inequalities, reversing gains in economic and social progress, and poverty reduction. To answer the question, what's government response to all of this? In view of this, the Philippine government has put in place set of comprehensive and strategic policies and measures to address these pertinent issues. In 2009, the Climate Change Act was enacted, which aimed to strengthen, integrate, consolidate, and institutionalize previous specific sector government initiatives. This facilitated the formulation of the National Change Action Plan, which serves as the government's roadmap for climate action and the lead policy document guiding the climate agenda at all levels of government. Enshrined in the plan is the long-term goal to promote a sustainable transition towards green growth by developing climate-smart industries and services. Among the three priorities include promoting climate-smart industries in partnership with the private sector, creating green jobs and sustainable livelihoods, especially in the rural areas and the most vulnerable men and women in these communities, and promoting climate resilient and sustainable cities and municipalities. The Climate has launched the Convergence Program, which promotes participation, cooperation, and partnership among various stakeholders, including government agencies, non-government organizations, and civil society groups for concerted and integrated climate action across all sectors. Early this year, the Philippine Green Jobs Act was passed into law to promote sustainable growth and decent job creation by providing incentives to enterprises generating green jobs. These include own account workers, micro, small, and medium-term enterprises, and community-based enterprises. The law affirms labor as a primary social economic force in promoting social development. It recognizes the urgent need to strengthen the capacity of workers and enterprises to mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change and abate further environmental degradation while taking advantage of the opportunities for employment and economic growth through the employment of business climate and working conditions. Under the new Philippine administration, we are in the process of crafting a medium-term Philippine development plan anchored on the country's long-term vision to make the Philippines prosperous, where our people live long and healthy lives and in high-trust society. The Sustainable Development Goals and the President's 0+10-point socio-economic agenda, which lays down the priority strategies that have direct and positive impact on the lives of Filipinos. The Green Jobs Act and Just Transition. Philippine Green Jobs Act of 2016 essentially incentivizes the creation of green jobs. Law defines green jobs as decent jobs that contribute to preserving or restoring the quality of the environment. This may include protection of the ecosystem and biodiversity, reduce energy, materials, and water consumption, decarbonize the economy, and minimize or altogether avoid waste pollution. Incentives are as follows: special deduction from taxable income equivalent to 50% of the total expenses for skills training and research development expenses, and tax and duty-free importation of capital equipment, provided such is actually directly and exclusively used in the promotion of green jobs of the enterprise. These incentives are in addition to fiscal and non-fiscal incentives already granted or existing under Philippine laws.
So I just wanted to turn, Madam, on what you have said now, having heard from Germany and other speakers, the role of enterprises and the type of incentives that you've mentioned. I would like to turn to Pierre. Pierre, coming from the International Organization of Employers, we know everybody has said business is indispensable. So please, could you tell us what business is doing in this field, and perhaps some ideas as to the incentives that we have heard about? Is that sufficient for business?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the opportunity. That's all right. Okay, so thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the opportunity. It is. Doesn't work?
Yeah.
Better. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to share our views, and good afternoon to everyone. Yes, I would like first of all to recall that when it comes to the transition to greener economy, we are dealing with nothing less than half of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So this is just to assess and evaluate the importance and the huge task ahead of us. From a business perspective, yes, indeed, we have a great role to play to increase resource efficiency, to boost renewable energy, to reduce pollution and waste. But you know, this is the business ADN to continually revise their strategies to position themselves as player. Let me share with you a very interesting survey from Accenture. They recently interviewed the CEOs worldwide, and it turned out that 80% of these CEOs believe that demonstrating a commitment to societal purpose is a differentiator in their industry. 87% of the CEOs believe the SDGs provide an opportunity to rethink approaches to sustainable value creation. And this will lead to new business models and also structural transformation we are talking about earlier on, and also changes in production patterns. Well, enterprises are taking action, are taking initiatives to improve their environmental footprint. And actually, companies are changing the way they work. And this will profoundly change industrial relations and labor activities. You said, I heard you, before you said, presenting Sharon Burrow, that trade unions were at the forefront of this beautiful, you know, collective ambition. It's true. I think we have to also say that business is at the front in delivering solutions, technologies, products, services. You know, all these solutions that are necessary to tackle the issue. And just having a look at the pavilion around us, and you will see all these amazing solutions provided by companies. This is, I think, things to be noted. And well, clearer technologies and eco-innovation have already begun to positively impact industrial processes. And I think that this impact will be spread also in the world of work, generally speaking. So, you know, this engagement of business is not just a moral requirement, a moral imperative. That makes sense. It's a win-win situation. But we have to add at the same time that the priority of business remains to meet the market demands and consumers' expectations. And I particularly appreciate what our fellow German panelist said earlier on. He said business has to, enterprises have to anticipate the future. This is it, yeah. And I think that the presence of business here is a testimony of that. I just want to add also that yesterday evening, there was a high-level business summit organized by the Moroccan employers, that's CGEM, and also the French employers, MEDEF. And together, they succeed to gather 43 employers' organizations. All of them committed to engage further in the fight against climate change. And I think this is a good sign too. And there was among them a very strong African group, and this is a good sign too, I think. And they signed a declaration, the Marrakesh Declaration, and they launched an initiative called the MBA for Climate, which is not Master of Business Administration, but Marrakesh Business Action for Climate. So we'll have a look on that. I think it could be a good thing. Well,
Thank you very much, Pierre. I think we've heard from Sharon that, I mean, I said it, that workers have been at the forefront of advocacy, but then you were saying that business is at the forefront of solutions. I'd like now to turn to Mr. Martin Frake, Director of Climate Change and Environment at FAO, to see what the United Nations as a system is doing in supporting member states around all the issues that we have heard about. Martin, please.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. We have little time and I'm sure you're eager to ask questions, so I shall be very brief. What I'm seeing in this COP is basically two agenda coming together, the SDG agenda and the UNFCCC climate negotiations. And I'm seeing how all of the United Nations system is really gearing up to respond to the NDCs and basically take the commitments that countries were bringing to the Paris Agreement at the heart of their action. I can, of course, best speak for my own organization, but that doesn't mean that other UN organizations are not as active. And let me start by just saying that our moderator from ILO will know better than myself that ILO has just adopted guidelines that were developed together from governments, employers, and workers' associations to basically describe how a transition into a green future can look like in a way that it's a fair and just transition. Let me go back a little bit to my own shop, the Food and Agriculture Organization. We are actually also, if you think about it, an employers' organization, because there is no bigger employer on this planet than agriculture. Actually, more than 1 billion people on this planet live on agriculture. And not only that, about 3/4 of the world's poorest, those who are still suffering hunger, and I'm talking about roughly 800 million people on this planet, are actually food producers themselves. And they're struggling to survive, and climate change is making their lives even harder, sometimes pushing them over the edge where migration and desperation is the last resort. But at the same time, these people are holding the key to a transformational change and to the transformational change we need. Why? Because if you look at the SDGs, basically the huge majority of the SDGs tackle issues that are related to agriculture. Agriculture, quite simply, has always been and is and will be the interface of human beings with nature. If we get agriculture wrong, if we deplete our soils, if we waste our water, if we kill biodiversity, this will backfire on us massively. So what we need is a massive change in agriculture, not least for employment. Because if you look at agricultural models that actually work, we are speaking about organic intensive farming. And if somebody asks me, what does it look like? I can tell you I have a 6-year-old daughter, and in their picture books, how a farm should look like, that is pretty precisely what you actually need. Because these are integrated systems in which you have trees, fruit trees, a bit of cropping, small animals, and all of that going together, creating synergy. Nothing is being wasted, but basically the excess of one production is fertilizing the rest of that. So we need to close these loops. The good news about it is this is really not complicated to do, but it is extremely labor intensive. So here's a possibility to actually work and get employment, which we desperately need. For 2030, if we take SDG8 seriously, we will need 600 million new jobs. And that is about 40 million jobs a year. Let me add another number, and then I stop with numbers. But the other number is another 11 million young people will enter the African labor market every single year until 2030. And somewhere, somebody has to absorb this workforce and has to create a future and livelihoods for farmers. So how do we do that? Technically, the possibilities are there. They just need to be disseminated. And this just is a tricky one, because most of the African countries have experienced a decline in extension services. It's difficult to get information to farmers, and if there are extension services, they are quite often coming from the private sector with a specific perspective, but broad information is often missing. Secondly, we have better big data than we ever had. I was in several presentations of the European Space Agency program. There is a new series of satellites called the Sentinel satellites, which just with pinpoint accuracy can tell you exactly what's happening on a piece of land. And I can say that because it's not a commercial endeavor. All of these data is available free of charge. So if we succeed in bringing this satellite, this massive data, down to the local level in an understandable way, which is absolutely possible because Africa, for example, has 95% of network coverage. I'm always saying you need to take a camel and go on a long ride to find the spot in the Sahara Desert where you don't have cell phone coverage. So if we can combine that, you could actually see a good lady farming somewhere in rural Africa with a precision device and really bringing irrigation and the bit of fertilizer she might be needing to exactly the right spot. So the third one is maybe the most complicated one because it's the very way we look at farmers. If a farmer is a person who has to live just by what the piece of land gives back, then we are in a very complicated game. Because those rural farmers, and we have about 500 million farming households worldwide, those who depend on their own resources to adapt to climate change will fail. If you already live at the edge, you cannot afford to change the system and you continue doing what you do unto the bitter end. So there need to be additional money. And this additional money, I think, can be mobilized and is justified to mobilize for two reasons. Number one, if farming is being done right, then it's a contribution to keep the ecosystem in place that is our life support system. And if you imagine yourself somewhere in a spaceship, you would be quite grateful for the engineer who is repairing your life support system. This is a spaceship. This is a planetary spaceship. We have to honor that. And secondly, and I want to close with this remark, it's also a question of justice and fairness because these very farmers are amongst the people who have contributed least to the problem and are suffering most. And with that, I leave you 2.5 minutes for questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think these are very striking points that you make. With that, I just would like to turn to participants, just see if there are any comments, any particular questions. And then I know, yes, we have colleagues. So I see, okay, so I see 4 people. Now I'll try to start with one of our sisters here first.
Thank you, Kamal. Because of time, I'll just direct my question to the Philippines, right? I love the progress that you've made, but I want to understand how you've engaged young people, especially young workers in the dialogue, because I see you've got a lot of comprehensive policies that you've made as a country. And how has been the consultation with young people, the youth in particular? Thank you.
I mentioned before that we have a new government, and this government's concern is really that no one is left behind and that poverty would be eradicated as soon as possible. So although the policies have been already put in place, right now what the government is doing is conducting several summits or consultations which have also involved the youth so that we would be able to hear from them what their problems are, what their thoughts are in order to improve the situation in the country. Where before, the youth were not that much involved in this current government, they are very much involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So may I go there and then we come to...
Ken Boyce from Christian Aid in London. I suppose I had a slight worry about a lot of the tone of the panel. It talked an awful lot about employment in very formal terms, but we know that the majority of people don't just have one job. The majority of the world's poorest actually earn a living through a variety of means. And I think informal employment has been around a very long time and it's not going away anytime soon. And we're going to have this transition while we deal with a better understanding of informal employment. So I guess my wish would be that we integrate understandings of informal employment a little bit more into discussions like this around a just transition, because we are going to have to understand that more if we're going to meet our climate targets and arrive at decent work.
I suggest we just take the 2 more questions and then we come to the panel. There is gentleman here and then madam there, and we will.
Hi. Yeah, my question was also for the Assistant Secretary from the Philippines. You mentioned the new law in the Philippines on green jobs and a number of the other initiatives that the government has undertaken to promote a just transition in your country, which of course faces a sort of disproportionate risk of climate change, as you described it, compared to other countries. My question would be to you about what measures the government is taking to ensure that these efforts are in fact producing a just transition, whether it's creating equity in terms of the jobs that are being created in new greener sectors, and equity in terms of dealing with displacements for people who are working in less green sectors. Thank you.
That we take just a final question there, and we will. Well, we just have to take that last question because of time, please.
Actually, mine is not a question in a way. I want to really appreciate this panel because for a very long time, and I've been listening to so many conferences or side events here, I've hardly seen where there is so much coherence in discussion. That means there is hope. We have a hope. But with this hope, there is something in terms of agriculture. Anyway, I didn't introduce myself. I'm a farmer. I run a farm in Cameroon, and I live solely on agriculture. My interest here is to tell policymakers, women, young people, and everybody that there is no need to think too much that farming is a myth or farming is something that's so abstract. It is a very, very rich space that the world should count on because it remains the only nature's solutions to climate change. So if we invest in farming, transformative agriculture especially, so that we reverse the trends, we can create millions and millions of jobs, we can withhold the social pressures on governments, we can reduce the ecological pressures, and we can hold thousands of young people, and even those retiring from services, engaged in profitable agriculture. If you want to know more, I can tell you very much more how agriculture is very profitable, and it remains the biggest success stories for the whole universe. Please, let's get to work in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. I do some gardening at home, so I'll come to see you. Tell me more about it. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Gwevese from Nigeria. I work with women at the grassroots level. My question is to the gentleman at the FAO. You talked about the satellite, and looks like there's going to be a serious move towards technology and adaptation. And African women farmers are the most marginalized, in terms of access to information because of the patriarchy situation. So what will the FAO do to bridge the gap between communication, patriarchy, and adaptation?
Thank you very much. Martin, there were some questions, so may I turn to you and Madame and Pierre for, maybe you please take the opportunity for any final points you wish to make.
Okay, very briefly, the question about the informal employment, yes, absolutely. And one of the strong adaptation measures for farmers is to be less dependent from one source of income and to be less dependent from one sort of crop. We are basically promoting that farmers have a little bit of aquaculture on the side, fruit trees on the farm. So that is also a strong method of resilience. And if a family member has somewhere a job in the city or is doing something on the side, that's building strong resilience for the entire family. So yes, thank you. That's a very important point. Then the question, how can we work with farmers to make the data useful for them, and what are we doing? You know that the Green Climate Fund is now fully operational. FAO is a accredited member of the Green Climate Fund since 14th of October, so we are brand new. We are working currently with WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, to develop a tool in which we can bring detailed weather forecasts to farmers in Africa. Because one simple thing is a changing rainfall pattern. If you learn farming from your mother and from your father, you have an idea when the rain sets on. But if climate change is changing that pattern, you can't rely on traditional knowledge anymore. So this is a very concrete example where you can quite simply, with text message or even a symbol, a sun, a cloud, rain, with a symbol, just inform farmers, look, you know, the likelihood for rain is really going up. Now is a good moment to bring out your seed. And it's simple. You don't need a latest generation telephone for that. It can be a 20-year-old GSM phone, and you can still receive a text message. And even an old GSM phone is actually logging in to a specific antenna somewhere. So it can give you with some accuracy the position of the farmer who is receiving the information. And I think that's interesting. And from there, when you develop that, you can go one step further and say, okay, this year's drought is not just another bad year, it's actually a pattern. And you should be moving, given the decreasing rainfall, let's say from maize to millet, or to grow more pulses because they're consuming less water, and they're good for your soils because they're nitrogen fixes. But that's a longer technical story. I hope I just answered in short a bit of your question. Thank you.
So on the question of what is happening regarding the Philippines Green Jobs Act, since it was just approved recently, what is happening now is that its implementing rules and regulations are still being finalized, and that the Project Advisory Committee and multi-party technical working group of the Just Transition Project was just constituted last October. So a multi-agency meeting was already initiated by the Climate Change Commission in partnership with ILO Manila, also held in October. And the goal was to consult various government agencies who are already issuing certifications or conducting assessments involving green goods or services or green technologies and practices. We expect that once all these are put in place, that we would really be able to put forward all other government bodies that are offering certifications and assessments, and that we can really strengthen green jobs and its development in the Philippines. Thank you.
Pierre, one word, and then that would be the closure of this panel, please.
Okay, just very briefly, yes, climate change, it means risks, challenges, but also opportunities. And I see job creation as a top one opportunity. And as you know, business is the first provider in terms of job opportunities. So we hope to have an enabling environment for job creation, and also to foster innovative technologies, because investments are detrimental, as it was said by everybody here. As I think we also need a practical approach versus, more theoretical, very difficult for me to pronounce that, or ideological one. Maybe two last words: cooperation, in-depth cooperation between all of us, and trust. That's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I first would like to apologize for our colleagues who are joining us just right now, but thank you to our panel, and thank you to all of you for having stayed with us. We can continue this discussion. The COP is still going on. Thank you so much for joining us.